There's a Korean saying that neglected wives become like furniture, you don't notice them until you need to move. Mildred Turner had become something worse, expensive wallpaper in a penthouse her husband bought but never lived in. For 8 years, she decorated empty rooms in Gangnam while Young Minute Park built his empire in Seoul's shadows. Then Kim Minute-jae kissed her in a moonlit garden, and suddenly her husband could see her again. Funny how rage works faster than love ever did. Welcome to my channel. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Are you in Atlanta? London? Toronto? Let me know you're here. Mildred Turner made exactly 3 promises to herself before moving to South Korea. Learn Korean fluently enough to spot danger in polite conversation. Never fall for a student's dangerous older brother. And absolutely, under no circumstances, marry a man whose import-export business involved more bloodstains than customs forms. She broke all 3 promises in the span of 1 intoxicating year. Now before we dive into how Mildred's fairy tale turned into a nightmare, do me a quick favor, hit that like button if you're ready for this story, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Young Minute realizes he's lost the only real thing he ever had. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Alright, let's get into it. The cafe in Itaewon smelled like cinnamon and burnt espresso, and that's where Mildred's careful life ended. She'd come for a language exchange, her clumsy Korean for someone's English, thinking she'd meet a college student or a bored housewife. Instead, Young Minute walked in wearing a black wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and when he smiled at her across the room, something in her chest forgot how to work properly. "You're Mildred?" His English was perfect, barely accented, but he said her name like it was something rare. "I'm Young Minute, sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." He wasn't sorry. She could tell by the way he settled into the chair across from her, all lazy confidence and dangerous eyes that catalogued everything about her in 3 seconds flat. He ordered in Korean without looking at the menu, then switched back to English mid-sentence like changing languages was as natural as breathing. "So," he said, leaning forward just enough that she caught his cologne, something expensive and dark. "What brings an American woman to Seoul?" She should have noticed how he asked questions but never really answered any. Should have wondered why a man who spoke flawless English needed a language exchange partner. Should have questioned the way his phone buzzed constantly but he never once checked it when she was talking. But Mildred had spent 37 years being sensible, and Young Minute looked at her like sensible was the last thing he wanted her to be. Their second date was in Bukhan Hanok village, where traditional houses pressed together like secrets. He led her through narrow alleys she'd never have found alone, his hand warm against her lower back. They stopped at a tea house where the owner greeted Young Minute with a bow so deep it looked religious, and they drank from cups so delicate Mildred was afraid to breathe on them. "You know a lot of people here," she said, watching how everyone seemed to recognize him. "I've lived in Seoul my whole life." He poured more tea, his movements precise. "You make connections." The way he said connections made her think of spiderwebs. But then he taught her Korean phrases in a voice that turned vowels into something intimate, and she forgot to wonder what kind of connections required that level of deference. By their 3rd month, she was staying at his apartment more than her own, a penthouse in Gangnam with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked like art installations. Sometimes men in dark suits would arrive unannounced, and Young Minute would excuse himself, disappearing into his home office for hours. She'd hear raised voices through the door, rapid Korean too fast for her elementary skills. Once, she thought she heard breaking glass. "Business," he'd say when he emerged, kissing her forehead like she was something fragile. "Nothing for you to worry about." She wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. Because when they were alone, he made her feel like every boring year before Seoul had just been waiting for this. He'd whisper Korean love phrases against her skin while teaching her their meanings, his mouth tracing translations across her collarbone. He took her to restaurants where no one asked for payment. Bought her clothes that made her feel dangerous in a way her reflection back in Virginia never had. Looked at her like she was the only woman in a city of 10 million people. The wedding happened 8 months after that first coffee. Not a real wedding. Young Minute said his family was complicated, that they'd have a proper ceremony later. This was just paperwork, he promised. Just to make things official while they figured out the rest. But there was a ceremony of sorts, in a private room at a restaurant Mildred couldn't pronounce the name of. Young Minute wore a black suit that made him look like elegant violence. She wore white because that's what brides wore, even in ceremonies that felt more like business transactions. His associates filled the room, 20 men in expensive suits, all with faces that suggested they knew things about breaking that she couldn't imagine. Several wore their jackets open just enough that she could see the leather shoulder holsters underneath. "Who are these people?" she whispered to Young Minute while someone made a toast in Korean she didn't understand. "Friends. Business partners." He squeezed her hand. "They wanted to meet the woman who finally made me settle down." One of them caught her staring at his holster and smiled, not friendly, just acknowledging that she'd seen. Young Minute pulled her closer, his arm around her waist, possessive and protective at once. The message was clear to everyone in that room: she was his now. Whatever that meant in this world of expensive suits and visible weapons, she belonged to Young Minute. She should have run. Should have noticed that love wasn't supposed to come with armed security. But Young Minute made her feel alive in a way that safety never had, and Mildred had spent too many years being invisible to walk away from being seen. So she stayed. She signed the papers. She became his wife in whatever dangerous world he inhabited. And she ignored every screaming warning sign because he made her feel like someone worth protecting. The first time Young Minute disappeared for 24 hours without calling, Mildred convinced herself it was a fluke. A dead phone battery. A last-minute meeting that ran late. She rehearsed these explanations to the empty house, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings like a prayer no one was listening to. By year 3, 24 hours had stretched into 3 days. Then 5. Then a full week that she marked by the accumulation of unopened mail on the entrance table and the progressive wilting of flowers she'd bought to brighten the foyer. She stopped buying flowers after that. What was the point of beauty for an audience of one? Mildred learned to set the table for herself at the massive 12-seat dining room table that had cost more than her father's annual salary. She'd choose a different seat each night, as if rotating through chairs could somehow make the emptiness less oppressive. Monday at the head of the table. Tuesday 3 seats down. Wednesday at the far end, pretending to be her own distant dinner guest. The illusion never worked. The silence always won. The holidays became exercises in creative lying. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, each one a masterclass in maintaining dignity while your heart quietly shattered. When friends asked about Young Minute's absence, she'd perfected the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Business trip. You know how it is. The company never sleeps. They'd nod sympathetically, never quite meeting her gaze, and Mildred wondered if they could see through her performance as easily as she could feel it crumbling from within. She became intimate with her own company in ways she'd never anticipated. Learned which rooms in the house had the best acoustics for crying without hearing your own sobs bounce back at you. Discovered that eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row wasn't depression, it was efficiency. Mastered the art of responding "we're great, thanks for asking" with such conviction that even she almost believed it. The charity galas were the worst. Mildred would spend hours getting ready, transforming herself into the picture-perfect wife of a successful businessman. The right dress. The right jewelry. The right shade of lipstick that said "I have everything under control." She'd arrive alone, explain Young Minute was closing a crucial deal, and spend the evening fielding sympathetic looks from other wives who clearly saw what she was desperately trying to hide. She'd laugh at jokes she didn't find funny. Sip champagne she didn't taste. Make small talk about vacations she'd never taken and restaurants she'd never visited. All while maintaining that flawless exterior, that unshakable composure that screamed "my marriage is perfectly fine" to anyone within earshot. Inside, she was drowning. But nobody needed to know that the woman in the Oscar de la Renta gown had cried in her car for 20 minutes before finding the courage to walk through those ballroom doors. By year 5, Young Minute's absences had evolved from days into weeks. 2 weeks became her new normal. 14 days of waking up alone, eating alone, existing alone in a house designed for a family they'd never have. She stopped making excuses to friends. Simply stopped seeing them altogether. It was easier than maintaining the fiction that everything was fine when nothing had been fine for years. Mildred filled the void with routines. Morning runs that grew longer because there was no reason to hurry home. Online courses in subjects she'd never use. Reorganizing closets that were already perfectly organized. Anything to avoid confronting the truth that was becoming impossible to ignore. She had become a ghost in her own life, haunting a marriage that existed only on paper. The concerned phone calls from her mother became weekly interrogations disguised as casual check-ins. "When was the last time you saw your husband?" her mother would ask, voice tight with worry. Mildred would deflect, redirect, reassure. "He's building an empire, Mom. These things take time." What she couldn't say was that she'd stopped counting the days between his visits. That she'd learned to recognize his presence by the displaced items in the bathroom rather than by actually seeing him. Her 32nd birthday arrived on a Tuesday in March, unmarked on any calendar that mattered. Mildred woke up alone, no surprise there, and went through her morning routine with the mechanical precision of someone who'd stopped expecting anything different. She made coffee. She ate toast. She didn't cry, because what was the point? Young Minute was 400 miles away in Busan, orchestrating a territorial expansion that would net the company another 8-figure deal. He'd remember her birthday 3 days later, send an extravagant bouquet with a card signed by his assistant, and never understand why Mildred left the flowers on the porch until they died. That night, she sat alone at the 12-seat table with a store-bought cupcake and a single candle. Made a wish she knew wouldn't come true. And finally admitted what she'd been avoiding for 7 years. She hadn't just lost her husband to his ambition. She'd lost herself to the pretense that any of this was survivable. The volunteer coordinator's smile had been sympathetic when Mildred signed up. "We're always grateful for help," she'd said, though her eyes suggested she'd seen plenty of wealthy wives looking for purpose between spa appointments. Mildred didn't correct the assumption. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was simpler and more desperate. She needed somewhere to be that wasn't the apartment, counting hours until Young Minute remembered she existed. The Seoul Youth Education Foundation occupied a renovated hanok in Bukhan, traditional architecture hiding modern purpose. Mildred found herself assigned to their literacy program, helping immigrant children navigate Korean and English simultaneously. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was teaching language to kids who spoke more Korean than she did, bridging gaps she couldn't cross in her own marriage. She met Kim Minute-jae 3 weeks in, at a donor coordination meeting she'd only attended because the regular volunteer had the flu. He stood at the front of the small conference room, casual in ways Young Minute never was, sleeves rolled up, presentation clicker abandoned on the table as he spoke directly to his audience instead of reading slides. His non-profit CEO title came with actual presence, the kind that made people lean forward rather than check their phones. "Ms. Calloway, right?" He'd approached her afterward, pronouncing her name carefully, correctly. "Erin mentioned you've been working with our English learners. The kids love you." Mildred had laughed, startled. "They're patient with my terrible Korean. Cultural exchange." His smile reached his eyes. "The best kind." Their friendship developed the way relationships do when they are built on something real, shared work, common purpose, conversations that went deeper than weather and traffic. Minute-jae recruited her for a new initiative, after-school programming for working parents. They met for planning sessions at coffee shops near the foundation, spreading papers across small tables, arguing pleasantly about curriculum structure and funding allocation. He never asked about her marriage, but his silences were gentle when she mentioned Young Minute in passing. He noticed things, when she checked her phone anxiously, when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, when she arrived to meetings with that particular exhaustion that came from being alone in a bed meant for two. "You don't have to answer this," Minute-jae said once, halfway through their third planning session. "But are you happy here? In Seoul, I mean. Not just with the foundation." Mildred had stared at her coffee, watching cream swirl into darkness. "I'm learning to be," she'd said finally, which was both true and completely inadequate. The Seoul Spring Gala was Minute-jae's idea, a fundraising showcase the foundation desperately needed. Mildred had volunteered immediately, grateful for the project that would consume her empty evenings. Young Minute had agreed to attend with the distracted air of someone confirming a dental appointment. "Black tie?" he'd asked, already scrolling through his phone. "I'll be there." The venue was a luxury hotel's rooftop garden, cherry blossoms strung with fairy lights that turned the night magical. Mildred wore emerald silk that young Minute hadn't noticed, too busy on his phone in the car. He disappeared 40 minutes into the event, urgent call requiring privacy, leaving her stranded mid-conversation with a potential donor who drifted away when it became clear she was alone. She found herself in the actual garden eventually, beyond the crowd, where decorative trees gave way to genuine greenery. The tears came quietly, the kind that came from accumulated disappointments rather than single catastrophes. She was so tired of being an afterthought, of planning her life around someone who kept forgetting she was in it. Mildred. Minute J's voice was soft behind her. I saw young Minute leave. Are you? He stopped when he saw her face, expression shifting to something pained. God. You shouldn't have to be alone right now. I'm always alone, she heard herself say, voice breaking. Even when he's there, I'm alone. Minute J closed the distance between them, reaching up to catch a tear with his thumb, the gesture so tender it made her breath catch. His hand lingered against her cheek, thumb tracing the path of moisture with devastating gentleness. You deserve so much better than this, he whispered. You deserve someone who sees you, who wants to be wherever you are, who would never. He kissed her before finishing the sentence, soft and careful and full of something that felt like coming home. Mildred didn't pull away. She leaned into it instead, into the warmth of being chosen, into the devastating relief of being noticed. His hand slid to the back of her neck, and she made a small sound against his mouth that was half grief, half gratitude. Neither of them saw young Minute emerge from the shadows near the garden entrance. Neither noticed the way his face transformed, rage and something darker flooding his features, his hands clenching at his sides until his knuckles went white. Neither heard his sharp intake of breath or the way he said Mildred's name, so quietly it barely disturbed the air. But young Minute saw everything. And in that moment, watching his wife kiss another man under borrowed starlight, something fundamental shifted behind his eyes, something that suggested he'd never been quite as absent as everyone believed. Young Minute sat in his office long after midnight, the city lights below him offering no comfort. He'd replayed that kiss 1,000 times, Mildred's body pressed against another man's, her face soft with something he'd never seen directed at him. Each replay carved deeper into his chest, a sensation so foreign he didn't recognize it at first. Jealousy. For 8 years, he'd felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of accumulation. Money. Power. Control. These things made sense. They followed rules. You strategized, you executed, you won. But this? This feeling that clawed at his insides like a living thing? This was chaos. He'd taken her for granted. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. Mildred had been like air, invisible, essential, always there. You don't think about breathing until someone's crushing your windpipe. And now, watching her slip away, he felt suffocated by her absence. The rational part of his brain understood what he should do. Apologize. Show vulnerability. Admit he'd been wrong. Court her the way normal men courted women, with flowers and promises and patience. But young Minute had forgotten how to be normal. If he ever knew at all. He only knew how to hunt. The decision crystallized with the same cold precision he applied to hostile takeovers. If he couldn't win her heart through sentiment, he'd eliminate the competition through strategy. Minute J was just another obstacle, another target to be neutralized. And obstacles didn't survive contact with Kang Young Minute. He pressed the intercom. Get me everything on Kim Minute J. I want a full background check by morning. Within 24 hours, his desk was covered with reports. Kim Minute J, orphan turned self-made success, owner of 3 restaurants, beloved in his community. Clean record. No scandals. The man was frustratingly virtuous, which only intensified young Minute's hatred. But everyone had pressure points. You just had to squeeze hard enough to find them. Young Minute assigned a rotation of his most discreet men to shadow Mildred's movements. Not to harm her, God, never to harm her, but to document everything. Where she went. Who she spoke to. How often she smiled at Kim Minute J's jokes. Each report landed on his desk like a knife between his ribs. Tuesday, 7:15 p.m. Subject observed laughing at restaurant. Physical contact noted, hand on subject's shoulder. Thursday, 2:30 p.m., subject and Kim observed walking through Riverside Park. Duration, 47 minutes. Subject appeared relaxed. Saturday, 8:45 p.m., subject attended cooking class with Kim. Observed sharing food. Intimate body language noted. Young Minute read each update with the focused intensity he'd once reserved for quarterly earnings reports. But where numbers had always been predictable, Mildred's growing attachment to another man defied all logic. What did Kim offer that he didn't? Warmth? Attention? Time? Things Young Minute had sacrificed in pursuit of empire. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built an empire but was losing the only thing that mattered. And unlike business rivals, he couldn't simply outbid Minute J or destroy him through market manipulation. This required a different approach. Something more personal. He spent hours researching Kim's businesses, his loans, his suppliers. The restaurants were successful but not liquid. Most of Kim's capital was tied up in inventory and property. A man spread thin. Vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. Young Minute's mind worked through scenarios with mechanical precision. A surprise health inspection could reveal violations, real or imagined. Suppliers could suddenly raise prices or refuse delivery. Permits could be delayed through bureaucratic red tape. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, but enough cumulative pressure to make Kim's life very difficult. But would Mildred respect him for destroying a good man? Would it drive her back to him or push her further away? The question gnawed at him. For the first time in his adult life, Young Minute hesitated. Not from conscience, he'd murdered that years ago, but from uncertainty. The rules that governed business didn't apply here, and he was navigating without instruments. He called his second-in-command at 3 a.m. Lee Jae-sung answered on the first ring, accustomed to Young Minute's nocturnal demands. "I need you to arrange something," Young Minute said, his voice carrying that particular flatness that preceded his most ruthless decisions. "Of course, sir. I want to know everything about Kim Minute J. Every debt, every secret, every vulnerability." Young Minute paused, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. The man looking back was a stranger, haggard, obsessed, unraveling. Start with his business loans. See who holds his paper. Then check his family connections, his friends, anyone he cares about. I want to know what matters to him. Understood, sir. Anything else? Young Minute's jaw tightened. Yes. Prepare a message he'll understand. Something that makes it clear Mildred belongs to someone. Make it subtle. I don't want her knowing it came from me. But Kim needs to know there are consequences for pursuing another man's wife. Even as he said it, the word tasted bitter. Wife. What claim did he have to that title when he treated their marriage like a business arrangement? Consider it done, sir. Young Minute ended the call and returned to the window, watching the city sleep beneath him. Somewhere out there, Mildred was dreaming. He wondered if she dreamed of Kim. If she smiled in her sleep the way she used to when they first married. Before he taught her that love was a liability. The predator in him was unleashed now, hunting the only prey that had ever mattered. But predators didn't understand love. They only understood possession. And Young Minute was about to remind everyone, especially Kim Minute J, that he never surrendered what belonged to him. The non-profit board meeting was in its final minutes when the conference room doors burst open. Young Minute strode in like he owned the building, which, Mildred thought with a sinking feeling, he probably did through some shell corporation she didn't know about. "Gentlemen. Ladies." Young Minute's voice cut through the startled murmurs. He carried a sleek leather briefcase, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent business that concerns this organization." Mildred's hands clenched beneath the mahogany table. Across from her, Minute J's expression remained professionally neutral, but she caught the microscopic tightening around his eyes. Mr. Park, one of the board members, an elderly industrialist who'd known Young Minute's father, half rose from his seat. "We weren't expecting." "Of course not." Young Minute set the briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. "I prefer the element of surprise in my philanthropic endeavors." He opened the briefcase with theatrical precision. Mildred's breath caught. Stacks of cash, neatly banded, filled the interior. The fluorescent lights made the bills seem to glow. 800 million won, Young Minute announced. A personal donation to support the exceptional work being done here. His gaze swept the room before landing on Mildred. Particularly the literacy programs for underprivileged children. I understand they are Mrs. Park's passion project. The room erupted in appreciative gasps and hurried whispers. Board members craned their necks to see the cash. Only Minute J remained still, his fingers steepled in front of him, watching Young Minute with the careful attention of a chess player studying an opponent's unexpected move. That's extraordinarily generous, Minute J said finally. His voice was warm, professional. Perfect. Though we typically process donations through proper banking channels. For tax purposes, you understand. Of course. Young Minute's smile didn't reach his eyes. My accountants will handle the paperwork. But I wanted the board to see my commitment firsthand. He turned to Mildred. To see how seriously I take the things that matter to my wife. The possessive emphasis on my wife landed like a slap. Mildred felt her face burn. Around the table, board members exchanged meaningful glances. The subtext was painfully obvious, a wealthy husband demonstrating his devotion, supporting his wife's charitable interests. How romantic. How generous. How completely humiliating. The literacy program serves 200 children annually, Mildred heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, mechanical. Your donation will make a significant difference in their lives. I'm counting on it. Young Minute closed the briefcase with a soft click. After all, investing in children's futures is investing in our community's future. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Kang? The direct challenge made several board members shift uncomfortably. Minute J met Young Minute's gaze steadily. Absolutely, Minute J replied. Children deserve every opportunity to succeed, regardless of their circumstances. He paused, letting the word settle. True generosity requires no audience. Young Minute's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then perhaps I should have made this donation anonymously. Perhaps. Minute J's smile was professional ice. Though I suspect recognition wasn't your primary motivation for being here today. The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Mildred wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but trapped between these two men using non-profit work as their battlefield. Gentlemen, the elderly board member interjected nervously. I'm sure we can all agree that Mr. Park's generosity, however it's delivered, benefits the children we serve. Of course, Young Minute said smoothly. He straightened his cufflinks. Cartier, Mildred noted automatically, the ones she'd given him for their first anniversary. I'll leave you to your meeting. Mildred, I'll wait for you in the parking garage. It wasn't a request. Mildred sat through the remaining minutes of the meeting in a fog of rage. Board members congratulated her on having such a supportive husband. Someone suggested naming a classroom after Young Minute. Minute J said nothing, but when their eyes met across the table, she saw understanding there. And something else. Concern, maybe. Or pity. She didn't want either. The moment the meeting adjourned, she grabbed her bag and headed for the elevator, ignoring Minute J's quiet Mildred, wait. She jabbed the parking garage button hard enough to hurt her finger. Young Minute was leaning against his Bentley when she emerged, looking like a magazine advertisement for wealth and privilege. The sight of him, so composed, so certain of himself, made something inside her finally crack. How dare you? Her voice ricocheted off the concrete walls. He straightened, surprise flickering across his features. I made a donation to a cause you care about. You invaded my workspace and waved money around like a peacock displaying feathers. She strode toward him, heels clicking sharply. You humiliated me in front of my colleagues and turned my non-profit work into your personal pissing contest with Minute J. I was supporting you. You were marking territory. The words exploded from her. Like I'm some prize to be won, some possession to be claimed. My wife. Did you hear yourself? You practically peed on the conference table. Young Minute's expression hardened. He was getting too close. That's not your decision to make anymore. Mildred's hands shook. You don't get to control who I work with. You don't get to stage interventions at my meetings. You lost those rights when you chose your company over our marriage. I never chose. Every day for 3 years, young Minute. Every single day, you chose. And now you think you can buy me back like a business acquisition? His eyes flashed. When he spoke, his voice was low, dangerous. Watch me. The words hung between them like a declaration of war. The first time Mildred noticed the black Mercedes was outside her Tuesday morning yoga class in Apguj. She dismissed it as coincidence. Seoul had more luxury cars than traffic lights. But when the same vehicle appeared 3 blocks from her favorite cafe in Samcheongdong the next afternoon, her stomach twisted with recognition. Young Minute wasn't even trying to hide anymore. She spotted him 2 days later through the cafe window, standing across the street in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Their eyes met. He didn't look away, didn't pretend to be doing anything else. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her like she was a painting he'd purchased but couldn't quite bring home. Jesus Christ, Sarah muttered, following Mildred's gaze. They were supposed to be discussing the children's literacy program, but Mildred had lost her train of thought entirely. Is that him? The gangster? He prefers business consultant, Mildred said weakly. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. Sarah leaned closer to the window. He's just standing there. That's not normal, Mill. That's stalker behavior with better tailoring. Mildred's phone buzzed. A text from young Minute. The green tea looks good. You should try the matcha cheesecake too. Her blood ran cold. He was close enough to see what she was drinking. I need to go, she said, gathering her things with shaking hands. But going home didn't help. Going anywhere didn't help. Young Minute appeared at her Pilates class in Gangnam the following week, not inside, but visible through the studio's floor-to-ceiling windows, sitting in his car like a patient predator. Her volunteer coordinator at the children's center mentioned a generous donor who'd been asking questions about the schedule. Her dry cleaner in Qingdamdong casually mentioned the handsome man who'd inquired when she usually picked up her clothes. He was everywhere, a shadow she couldn't shake, and Seoul was eating it up. The photos appeared on Naver first, grainy but unmistakable shots of young Minute's distinctive profile outside various Gangnam establishments, always at times that coincided with Mildred's presence. Then Twitter caught fire. Someone with too much time and excellent Photoshop skills created a thread mapping his appearances, complete with timestamps and location tags. The hashtag #GangnamLoveTriangle started trending. The comments were a mix of romantic delusion and genuine concern. This is what real love looks like. He's showing dedication. This is literally stalking? Someone check on this woman? Plot twist, they're shooting a K-drama and we're all extras. My boyfriend won't even pick me up from the airport, but this man is tracking her yoga schedule. Mildred watched her privacy disintegrate in real time, each new post dissecting her routine, her choices, her life. Someone identified Minute J from a restaurant photo, and suddenly the speculation doubled. The chaebol heir versus the underworld king. Beauty influencers started calling it better than any drama currently airing. She felt like an animal in a glass cage. You need to get a restraining order, Minute J said firmly, his hands gentle on her shoulders as they stood in his apartment overlooking the Han River. They'd started meeting here instead of public places, but even that felt temporary, like young Minute was just waiting for the right moment to materialize. This isn't romantic. This is dangerous. A restraining order, Mildred repeated, and the laugh that escaped was sharp and bitter. Against young Minute Park? Jay, he doesn't just know the law, he is the law in his world. You think a piece of paper from a judge he probably owns would stop him? Then let me handle it. I have resources. No. She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't want you two escalating this into some kind of territorial war. That's exactly what he wants. He's trying to prove a point. What point? That he always gets what he wants. That nowhere is safe from him. That I'm his, whether I agree or not. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. I just want to exist, Jay. I want to go to yoga and drink coffee and not feel like I'm being hunted. Minute J pulled her close, his embrace warm and solid. Everything with him was steady, predictable, safe. So why did she still feel like she was falling? 2 days later, Mildred came home to her penthouse after an exhausting shift at the children's center. She kicked off her shoes in the dark entryway, too tired to bother with the lights immediately, reaching for the switch. And froze. Someone was sitting in her living room. Young Minute's silhouette was barely visible against the Seoul skyline glittering through her windows, his posture relaxed in her favorite reading chair like he'd been waiting for hours. Probably had been. The darkness made him look like something from a film noir, all sharp angles and patient danger. "How did you get in?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Does it matter?" His tone was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "We both know locks are just suggestions. You need to leave. In a moment." He didn't move, didn't shift. Just sat there in the dark like a villain who'd been waiting for this scene his entire life. "I have one question first." Mildred's hand found the light switch, but she didn't flip it. Part of her didn't want to see his face, to read whatever emotion might be written there. "Are you in love with him?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. 4 floors below, Seoul hummed with its endless energy. But in her dark living room, with the man who dismantled her privacy piece by piece, there was only silence and the terrifying realization that her answer mattered more than any restraining order ever could. Young Minute stood in the center of what could only be described as a culinary war zone, staring at the blackened disk that had once aspired to be a pancake. Smoke curled lazily from the skillet while the overhead alarm shrieked its judgment. Flour dusted his designer suit like industrial fallout. A carton of eggs had met its tragic end across the marble countertop. He'd forgotten about his ban on that particular detail, but the mess was real enough. The coffee maker gurgled ominously, having produced something closer to motor oil than morning brew. He'd watched 17 YouTube videos. 17. How hard could breakfast be? Americans ate this stuff every single day. Children made pancakes. Actual children. The answer, apparently, was devastatingly hard. The smoke detector continued its ear-splitting symphony. Young Minute grabbed a dish towel, the only thing he'd managed not to destroy, and waved it uselessly beneath the alarm. His hand throbbed where he'd grabbed the skillet handle without a potholder. Professional victory was his native language, but this kitchen spoke only in humiliation. The alarm finally surrendered to silence, leaving only the acrid smell of his failure hanging in the air. What in God's name? Mildred stood in the doorway, her hair still tousled from sleep, wearing an oversized t-shirt that had once belonged to him. Her eyes went wide as they traveled across the devastation. Batter splattered across the backsplash like abstract art, a mixing bowl overturned on the floor, something that might have been bacon reduced to carbon strips in a pan. "I was making you breakfast." Young Minute's voice came out smaller than he'd intended. "Your favorite. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, orange juice." He gestured to the counter where the orange juice container sat, at least, intact and unopened, his sole triumph in this disaster. "You've never cooked a day in your life." "I'm aware of that now." He looked down at his flour-covered hands, at the burn already blistering on his palm. The internet made it look simple. Something shifted in Mildred's expression. Not quite softness, but a crack in her armor. She moved into the kitchen, her bare feet careful around the broken eggshells. "You could have burned the entire house down." "I was trying to do something normal. Something a husband would do." The word felt foreign in his mouth. Husband. He'd been a boss for so long he'd forgotten how to be anything else. "I wanted you to wake up to something that wasn't my assistants arranging everything, or 5-star chefs, or another grand gesture that money bought. Just me. Trying." Mildred picked up the charred pancake, examining it like a museum artifact. "This is beyond trying. This is a cry for help." Despite everything, Young Minute almost smiled. "I followed the recipe exactly." "Did you preheat the pan?" "There were preheating instructions." She set the pancake down, and for a moment, something like sympathy flickered across her face. Then it hardened again, memory reasserting itself. "You disappeared for 8 years, Young Minute, 8 years. No calls. No explanation. Just gone. And now you're here burning down kitchens and expecting what? That I'll forget? No. He moved toward her, stopped when she stepped back. I'm not expecting you to forget. I'm asking you to teach me. Teach you what? How to make pancakes. How to be a husband instead of a boss. The admission cost him something, stripped away another layer of the armor he'd worn for so long. I know how to close deals. I know how to build empires. I know how to make grown men cry in boardrooms. But this? He gestured at the wreckage around them. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. Mildred leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could see the weariness in her face, the weight of 8 years of wondering, waiting, then finally moving on, or trying to. You think one destroyed breakfast makes up for anything? Her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. You think showing vulnerability erases what you did? No. He met her eyes, unflinching. But I'm asking for a chance. A real one. Not built on money or power or grand gestures. Just time. Consistency. Showing up. You're good at showing up dramatically. She picked up a piece of the carbonized bacon, let it crumble between her fingers. You're terrible at showing up consistently. The words landed like physical blows, but he didn't deflect them. Didn't make excuses. Just stood there in his ruined suit, in his destroyed kitchen, and let the truth of her accusation settle into his bones. Then teach me, he said quietly. Teach me how to show up. Every day. Not just when it's dramatic or convenient or fits into some grand plan. Teach me how to be present. Mildred stared at him for a long moment. Then she moved to the pantry, pulled out a new bag of flour, set it on the counter with a decisive thump. Actions matter more than burnt breakfast, she said. You want to prove something? Clean this mess up. Then we'll see about teaching you how to make actual pancakes. No promises beyond that. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. The doorbell chimed just as Mildred was pouring her third cup of coffee that morning, her hands still trembling slightly from the previous night's chaos. She wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not the statuesque Korean woman standing in the hallway, designer handbag hanging from the crook of her elbow, her expression carefully neutral in that way that suggested years of practice hiding real emotions. You must be Mildred, the woman said in flawless English, though her accent carried the refined edge of someone educated in Seoul's best schools. I'm Yoon Ji-won. May I come in? Mildred's stomach dropped. She knew that name. Young Minute had mentioned an ex-fiancé once, dismissively, the way someone might reference an old restaurant they no longer frequented. But standing before her now was no casual footnote in Young Minute's history. This woman wore confidence like armor, her posture perfect, her gaze assessing Mildred with the kind of scrutiny that saw everything and revealed nothing. How did you know where I live? Mildred asked, not moving from the doorway. Young Minute isn't the only one with resources, Ji-won replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Please. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I wish someone had warned me before I made the same mistakes you're about to make. Against her better judgment, Mildred stepped aside. Ji-won entered with the grace of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous social terrain, settling onto the sofa as if she owned it. Mildred remained standing, arms crossed defensively across her chest. 10 years ago, Ji-won began without preamble, I was engaged to Young Minute. My family approved, I came from the right background, attended the right schools, knew the right people. On paper, we were perfect. Seoul society ate it up. She paused, studying her manicured nails. I thought I loved him. I definitely loved the version of himself he showed me. Why are you telling me this? Mildred's voice came out sharper than intended. Because Young Minute doesn't love women, Ji-won said, her tone matter-of-fact, clinical even. He collects them. I was his proof he'd made it in Seoul society, that the street kid from Itaewon could marry into old money. You're his proof he's cosmopolitan, open-minded, that he's transcended the narrow prejudices of his world. She finally looked up, and Mildred saw something raw beneath the polished exterior. But his real love is power. Everything else is just decoration. The words hit like physical blows. Mildred sank into the chair opposite G1, her legs suddenly unsteady. You don't know what we have. Don't I? G1 leaned forward slightly. 1 week before our wedding, 1 week after 2 years of planning, after my family had spent a fortune, after invitations had been sent to every important family in Seoul, young Minute called it off. No warning. No real explanation. Just a phone call saying he couldn't go through with it. Maybe he realized he didn't love you, Mildred said, hating how defensive she sounded. A rival gang threatened my family, G1 continued as if Mildred hadn't spoken. They found out about the engagement, saw me as leverage against him. And young Minute's solution wasn't to protect me, wasn't to use his considerable resources to keep my family safe. His solution was to ghost me completely. Eliminate the vulnerability. Erase the problem. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Mildred thought of Taesung's threats, of young Minute's immediate, violent response, of the blood on that warehouse floor. He'd burned down half his operation to keep her safe, or was it to keep his possession from being stolen? He's different now, Mildred heard herself say, but the words felt hollow. Is he? Ji-won's laugh held no humor. Tell me, has anyone threatened you recently? Has young Minute responded with restraint and mature communication? Or did he turn the city upside down to prove a point? Mildred said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Ji-won stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced elegance. I'm not telling you to leave him. Honestly, I don't care what you do. But I spent 5 years after our breakup in therapy, unpacking why I accepted someone who valued control over connection, who treated me like a chess piece instead of a person. I don't want to read about you in the news someday, another casualty of young Minute's need to win. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. He'll burn down Seoul to keep you now that someone else wants you. The question isn't whether he'll fight for you, of course he will. You're his. The question is whether he'll actually change, whether he's capable of seeing you as anything other than territory to defend. Ji-won's expression softened slightly, something almost like pity crossing her features. That's the question I never got to answer. Maybe you'll be luckier than I was. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the echo of truths Mildred had been desperately trying not to face. The Gangnam Cultural Foundation Gala sprawled across 3 floors of Seoul's most prestigious hotel, a cathedral of wealth where Korea's elite gathered under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most homes. Mildred had dressed carefully that evening, choosing a midnight blue gown that whispered rather than shouted, her only concession to extravagance the diamond earrings young Minute had given her years ago. She'd worn them as armor, not ornament. The first sign of trouble came when young Minute's entrance caused the room to fall silent. He moved through the crowd like a king returning from exile, his presence commanding attention without effort. When he reached the podium, his announcement sent ripples through the gathered elite. He was donating the Crown Tower, valued at over 200 billion won, to establish the Mildred Park Educational Foundation. Scholarships for working-class students. A legacy in her name. The applause was thunderous. Mildred felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, the pressure of expectation crushing her chest. This was young Minute at his most dangerous, not threatening, but generous. Not taking, but giving. Making refusal seem churlish, ungrateful, small. Before she could process it, Minute J materialized at her elbow. May I have this dance? His voice carried across the nearby tables, deliberately loud. A challenge wrapped in courtesy. The orchestra had already begun playing. Minute J's hand was warm against her waist as he guided her onto the floor, his movements confident, practiced. His trying to buy you with philanthropy, Minute J murmured. Impressive, but transparent. And you're using me to humiliate him, Mildred replied quietly. Equally transparent. Perhaps. But I'm honest about my motives. His smile was slight, knowing. Can he say the same? The answer came in the form of Ji-won's entrance. She swept through the ballroom doors like winter personified, her hanbok a masterpiece of traditional craftsmanship reimagined through a designer's vision. Ice blue silk embroidered with silver cranes. Hair swept up in an elegant twist. She looked like everything Mildred wasn't, Korean, sophisticated, belonging to this world of old money and older bloodlines. The whispers started immediately. Photographers materialized as if summoned. Ji-won's gaze found young Minute across the room, and something passed between them, not love, but recognition. Two people who'd once shared a language Mildred would never fully speak. The pressure in Mildred's chest tightened. She could feel the narrative being written around her in real time, the foreign maid caught between titans, the American interloper disrupting Seoul's social order, the romantic subplot for a city's entertainment. She was trending on social media before the first course was served, her face captured from a dozen angles, her story dissected by strangers who'd never asked her name. When Minute J tried to spin her into another dance, something inside Mildred snapped. She pulled away, her movement sharp enough to draw attention. The orchestra faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence as she walked toward the center of the ballroom, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a countdown. Someone handed her a microphone, she never knew who, and suddenly the entire gala was watching, waiting, expecting another chapter in Seoul's favorite drama. "I'm not doing this anymore," Mildred said. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I'm not a prize to be won at auction. I'm not a trophy to be displayed in your collections. I'm not a plot twist in whatever story you're all enjoying so much." Young Minute had started moving toward her, but she held up one hand, stopping him. "I came to Korea to clean houses," she continued. "To work hard, save money, build a life. I didn't come here to be fought over like property. I didn't come here to be the American who doesn't understand Korean culture. I came here to be myself, and that's the one thing none of you will let me be." The silence was absolute. Someone's phone camera flashed, capturing the moment for posterity. "So I'm leaving," Mildred said. "All of you. This circus. This performance. I'm walking out that door, and I'm going home, and I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not being watched, judged, and turned into entertainment." She set down the microphone with a deliberate click and walked toward the exit. Young Minute called her name. Minute J took a step forward. Ji-won's expression remained perfectly composed, perfectly unreadable. Mildred kept walking. The night air outside was cold and clean, washing away the perfume and pressure of the ballroom. She stood on the hotel steps, breathing deeply, feeling like herself for the first time in months. The chaos she'd left behind didn't matter. The trending hashtags didn't matter. Only this, her breath, her choice, her life, mattered. She took a taxi home, ignoring 17 calls. At the penthouse, she poured herself wine and waited. Young Minute arrived 2 hours later, entering quietly, his earlier confidence stripped away. "I'll give you one chance," Mildred said before he could speak. "Not because of your money or your dramatics. Because I remember who you were before your empire consumed you. But here are my terms." She outlined them methodically: intensive couples therapy with a real psychologist, complete transparency about his business dealings, consistent presence in their daily life, and zero retaliation against Minute J. Professional, personal, permanent changes. 6 months, she finished. "You prove you can be a partner, not a predator. You fail, I'm gone. No amount of money or power brings me back." Young Minute stood very still, processing terms he'd never expected to face. "I agree," he said finally. 3 days later, they sat in their first therapy session. Young Minute was visibly uncomfortable, his powerful frame rigid in the modest office chair. But he was present. He was trying. Mildred watched him struggle with vulnerability and dared to feel something dangerous: hope. Not certainty. Not trust. Just the fragile possibility that a man built for conquest might learn to love like a human being. The therapist asked her first question. Young Minute's jaw tightened. Then, slowly, he began to answer. Outside, Seoul continued spinning, indifferent to their small revolution. If you're captivated by Mildred's journey from invisibility to empowerment, don't miss what happens next. Like and subscribe for more stories of love, power, and the courage to demand your worth.